Bryan, you're very welcome to the home of hurling.
Well, thank you for being here. It's been great to see all the hurling pitches.
Yeah, it's a very interesting area. This is where the GAA, the Gaelic Athletic Association, was founded technically and officially in 1884. So where you're presenting tomorrow as well is part of another sporting development here in Thurles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, lots of history here.
Lots of history. Now, a bit about your history. So we know you're an eminent specialist, consultant, lecturer, coach in the whole area of conditioning, and you've had a long history in that. But forget that for the moment. Where did you come from originally? Where do you come from, and what interested you in becoming involved in this fascinating journey that you're on?
Yeah, so I'm originally from a small town called Jay, Oklahoma, where there's more cows than people. Oklahoma, since we're in Ireland, it's like dead center of the United States, middle of the Bible Belt. There's, it's a area stricken with poverty. I grew up in a trailer. Then we, and my family is still on that family land. And my grandmother still lives there, my uncle and aunt. So I grew up there. And then we moved, parents got divorced, ended up moving around a little bit. And ended up, going through junior high on up in a place called Springfield, Missouri. And obviously, since this is on video, it's no surprise to anybody that I've got a birthmark on my face. And kids are cruel, and I got made fun of mercilessly. And my dad had some issues with it as well. And I decided that whenever I was 11 years old, 12 years old, that why don't I get a weight set? Because if I get bigger and stronger than everybody else, they'll quit picking on me. And that's exactly what happened. I ended up being biggest and strong. As a freshman in high school, I was the second strongest person in the school. And then that led me into powerlifting. And then, and actually we'd have to back up a little bit. Whenever I was 13, right before I turned 14, right before my freshman year in high school, my mom knew that I was into weight training, obviously, and there was a strength and conditioning camp on campus at Southwest Missouri State University, so a small directional university. And there were some names that might go back to a time that you would remember. And a guy named Russ Ball, who is now, he was a strength coach for the Kansas City Chiefs at the time. Now he's a front office guy for the Green Bay Packers, so those are National Football League teams. A guy named Rob Rogers, who at the time was at Baylor, and Rob has done everything and been everywhere. And Kirk Woolfolk, who left that school. He was the head strength coach at Southwest Missouri State at the time, left to go to Notre Dame, and I believe he's still at Navy as the director of the U.S. Naval Academy. And I fell in love with it. I'm like, wow, this is a job, getting people stronger and faster. And I sat down and I talked with Russ and Rob. And they weren't talking to me like I'm some little punk kid that's, wasting their time. And I'm asking questions about lifting and, this is a job and things like that. And they put me on the path of being a strength and conditioning coach. So at age 13, I knew that that's what I wanted to do from spending the time with them. And I got the book that they recommended for me, which was the only one I could find at that time, by E.J. Crease, Doc Crease, The Speed Strength Training for Football. And that was my introduction to the Russian literature. And then I read everything that I could get my hands on, started competing in powerlifting, and did fairly well in that. I would say that I would joke around and say that I won the either the AA or AAA World Championship in powerlifting. That's it was like the drug tested divisions and things like that. That it wasn't like the WPO or anything of those of that nature. And knowing that I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach, I would consider myself an opportunist. If I see something that I'm like, hey, that's a good opportunity, I'm doing it. It's kind of like Yogi Berra said, if there's a fork in the road, pick it up. And everybody's like, oh, that's stupid. It's like, really, it's an ingenious thought process. If you see an opportunity, you pick it up and you take it. You don't just wait for something else to come by. And I've taken every opportunity that I can, which sometimes has led to me being overworked and burnt out, but it has also led me to be where I'm at today. So I happened to be sitting, unfortunately, as so many of my stories involve alcohol, I was sitting hungover, skipping class to study for skipping organic chemistry to study for a history exam. And I'm sitting there, and a friend of mine from high school was on the football team, and the weight room was across from, it was about probably 300 yards, so I don't know what that is, 250 meters or so away from the athletics building. And the head strength coach happened to walk up, and he was talking with Fitz, my friend, and he's like, yeah, this guy's a power lifter. And he's like, oh, you ever heard of Louis Simmons? I'm like, well, I've heard of Louis. I've never done any of his stuff, but I read about him Powerlifting USA. He's like, oh, you're a pretty big guy there. And Fitz is like, yeah, he just won the nationals for his age group. It's like, oh, no shit. Why don't you come up? I'll give you a job. I can't pay anything. And the rest is history. So that's where I got started. And he is somebody who turned me on. He actually, I wouldn't say he put a gun to my head, but he highly recommended that I read these photocopies of the old Sport Ivany presses. So hopefully Rick doesn't get in trouble for me publicly saying that we were pirating books. But I was reading photocopies of these, Soviet texts, and that's actually where I got started with VBT, because looking at the Roman text and and some of, I think it was either Vroshansky or Matveyev, or Medvedev, yeah. Where I saw this M/S and this MS -1, and I'm like, man, what is that? And then we happened to go visit Lou, and Lou had just got Nintendo in. And he's like, oh, this thing reads out in meters per second. I'm like, I know exactly what to do with this. So we went back and we took some of the stuff, and we had to adjust it because we weren't dealing with Olympic lifters. Yeah. We were dealing with athletes who don't have proficient Olympic lifting technique, and use some of my powerlifting background and some of the stuff that Louis had found. And just at age 21, 22 of age, I developed the start and pretty much the central foundation of what we call VBT today. And, it was because I remember stuff, and I could, just make the connections and take every opportunity that came along.
Two great points that you make there. Mentorship.
Yeah.
From the original teenage years.
Yeah.
Through to taking an opportunity when it presented itself.
Yeah.
And then the influence, third point, education. You read.
Yeah.
And prepared. And you probably got access to literature that was, again, wasn't even translated probably properly at that stage.
Oh, it was horrible translations. Yeah.
So that inspired you to, okay, you were an athlete, you were lifting.
Well, I wouldn't call a power lifter an athlete, but
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I was active.
You were active, okay.
Yeah.
So college-wise and school-wise, track that.
Oh gosh, I started out as a biomedical science major and ended up as a health education promotion major because of a disagreement that a biochemistry instructor and I had. And that ended up with the oak desk flipped up on its edge, but we'll go into that over beers rather than on video. But I started out as that, and everybody thinks I'm an exercise science major. It was actually education, school, and counseling psychology is what my second master's and PhD are in. And it was health education. It was my degree. So all of my knowledge of strength and conditioning has been self-taught. So, people are like, whenever I'm like, oh, I'm self-taught on this, I don't know the best stuff with the force plates or the EMG, and everybody's like, whatever. It's like, well, no, really, I am. I've just read the books and went and played around with it and tried to figure it out. So sometimes I'm wrong on things, and that's okay because I didn't have a formal education. But at the same time, I don't necessarily view that as a weak point because I don't have this absolute viewpoint because that's what somebody told me. That I think that sometimes we get into these stone blinders on us because we're like, oh, well, everybody always has to get stronger. And that's the only thing that there is and that's what I was preached a lot to by people who were older than me in the strength and conditioning field. And I'm like, yeah, I don't buy it. How is him going from a 275 kilo squat to a 300 kilo squat? How is that going to make him a better football player? Well, he gets stronger, so he is. It makes him better. I'm like, I don't think so. And So it allowed me to look at things differently. And so I still read the material, understood the material, but I didn't have the dogma behind it. And some of the dogma I do have, and I talk about that with the VBT. It's like the zones were off of squat, bench, and deadlift. Why that? What was my athletic background?
Yes.
Powerlifting. And I think that every strength and conditioning coach, we're strength and conditioning coaches because we like to lift weights, right? How many athletes are there to lift weights? Well, if somebody's on a powerlifting team or an Olympic lifting team, they are. So, I think that we all coaches have got their cognitive biases, and that sometimes we have to be able to just sit there and realize what it is and be able to separate ourselves from it once we realize what that bias is. The bigger squat, bench, and deadlift isn't necessarily going to make a better athlete. It'll make a stronger athlete, but that doesn't make them better. Likewise, just focusing so much time on the lifts of the snatch and the clean and jerk. It's like they're going to get really good at the clean and jerk. They're going to get really good at the snatch, but is that necessarily going to transfer to the sport? And that's the area that, I think that I've done a little bit. I wouldn't say I've done better than my peers on, but I know that that's in the forefront of my mind. It's something that I'm more cognizant of than some of my peers.
Okay, so the VBT, velocity-based training, the whole concept and the original introduction to it, did that help you then debunk the myth that, you had, as you were discussing, okay, it is about lifting, it is about getting strong, but at the same time, it's not all about that. There's a lot more. So when did that focus start? Around what time, what year?
About 2003.
Okay.
Because when 2002, 2003, somewhere around there, I took the 6-year plan as an undergraduate, because I had to change majors, and it was the last 2 years of that, maybe 3 years, whenever we had, I had already read about it and was curious about it. And then whenever we got the Tendo, that's whenever everything kind of took off. But we only had one, so it wasn't like we could do all of our training on that. So what I did was we did what I now know would be called load velocity profiling. And I load velocity profiled everybody that I could get on the football team, softball team, men's and women's basketball team, field hockey, baseball, and I think that might have been it, or there might have been one sport. And everybody was in plus or minus 0.05 meters per second for every 5%. It might have been 0.04 meters per second. And we see that same relationship exists in that paper by Gonzalez Badillo and Sanchez Medina for their people. And and my velocities were similar to theirs. Our squat velocities were similar to what they found on bench press. Maybe it was vice versa, but whatever. But that was all Division I athletes. So whenever some of the high school people are like, oh, well, my guys don't fit it. Well, you guys aren't Division I athletes. So the downside to the zones is that it was a very homogeneous population. Somebody's got to be extremely athletic. Yeah. It turns out that for the NAIA guys, it worked out pretty well, at least at William Woods University, that they fit in with those guidelines fairly well. But I took collected the zones and went with it from there, the squat, bench, and deadlift. And I thought that it was a way to keep seeing improvements in speed and power for a longer duration. And whenever I took my vertical jump and I turned it into the Sears equation to count for body weight, and I used the Sears equation because I've published with Steve Sayers. So if I didn't use that equation, I'd be an asshole, which, calling a spade, it's probably true, but at least I was nice enough to keep using his equation. But then I found that we were able to continue to improve power for 3 years, where most, whenever we didn't use VBT, we were only 12 to 18 months. And that was actually just the exact same as what was found from a paper by Jacobson from Oklahoma State Division I football and Miller from Texas A&M football. That, hey, let's just get stronger. Let's just get stronger. Well, vertical jump and power only improved for 12 to 18 months. So what are we doing? During that period, we actually happened to take a middle of the country, no reason to come there school that we were ranked number 1 in the nation for a short time. So was it the training? I'm not saying it was the training, but I'll say that helped, that we were able to develop our guys longer. So where somebody was getting a more developed athlete coming in, we were getting them to that level and maybe a bit beyond by having a longer time to develop them. Now, I think that it did lead me to have some issues and some blinders thinking that, oh, well, this works and I don't need to worry about anything else. So then I wasn't looking at joint angle specificity and other exercise transfer until much later, within the past 3 to 5 years.
Okay. Go back in a bit for those who might be listening about the method applied with the different zones. And just to explain it in a simple way, what are you starting with?
So I went with things that might have been, I think I majored in minor to start out with, right? So I had the zones that were the absolute strength, then accelerative strength, strength speed, speed strength, and starting strength. And those zones matched up with something that I was given from Buddy Morris, who told me it was from a Carmelo Bosco paper, but I don't know if it actually was from a Carmelo Bosco paper because Hank had no idea what I was talking about whenever I said this. That the 20 to 40% was 15 to 40% was starting strength, 40 to 60 was non-quantifiable, 60 to 80 was accelerative strength, 80 to 1RM, 80% to 100% 1RM is absolute strength. And you look at most of the charts, it makes sense, right? And I don't think anybody would argue that. That 40 to 60% that they called non-quantifiable, it wasn't that there was no results there, it was just that there was a huge overlap. Well, if you take that kind of that 30% and that 60%, you look at the Koneko study with that you can see that there's power increases from both of them, but the power increase occurs from a different, it either comes more from the velocity aspect or it comes more from the strength aspect, the force aspect. Well, that's strength, speed, and speed strength, which a Jindaka or Jadovsev, I think it was Jindaka, it was I think his name's Boris. No, it's Jadovsev. Whatever, and I know I'm butchering the pronunciation of the names. I'm a guy from, it's Jandacka. I can find the reference in my Mendeley.
Yeah,
where he had load velocity and velocity load. Roman had strength, speed, and speed strength. So I went with Roman stuff.
Okay.
Because it was published way earlier, and it made sense to me. And honestly, that was the first time. I'm a bit, you can see the beard, and we were talking earlier. I'm always trying to buck the trend and whatever. And at the time, everybody's like, you have to do Olympic lifts for power. You have to do Olympic lifts for power. And I'm like, no, you don't. Let's just use velocity. I don't think that it's an exercise has magic pixie dust in it. I think it's the intent of the movement and the speed of the movement that causes the transfer, right? So then that led me to, Al Vermeil had some stuff where, strength, speed, and speed strength, he used them interchangeably. Louis Simmons says strength, speed, and speed strength, they were interchangeable. But then whenever I looked at those things, and then the Koneko study just made it make absolute perfect sense, like the lights came on and it was like this magic moment type thing where it all made sense. It's like, dude, these are two different traits that both cause power to increase, and they're working from different mechanisms. And it was non-quantifiable because they didn't break it apart in that method. Because I don't know where those percentages came from and how they determined what it was. But it was, there obviously there's two different ways. There's multiple ways to get to the same thing. Like we came here from the Shannon Airport. I bet we could have came a different route. You can get many roads lead to Rome.
Okay, on that point, so we'll pick up on a few just to get in. Instruments. Yeah. Since the early noughties have changed and increased dramatically. So without preferencing an instrument, are you now using, velocity-based training instruments, whether linear position transducers or whatever? What are you using now? And how frequently are you using them, or do you recommend they're used? Because as you said, in the old Tendo, the Fitrodine originally, you'd only one, and you could only train one at a time, maybe two or three. Yeah. But now we have them; they're on our phone. We can pick them up anywhere. So, what are you using, and how often? In other words, applying them to the training situation.
Just with the velocity device. Yeah. Are you asking me specifically what device do I use?
Specifically, yeah.
So I use the GymAware. I use the GymAware because I noticed. And again, remember, I don't come from the academic background, right? So I just knew, like, this is supposed to measure bar speed, right? And what I noticed was here's my barbell where I'm lifting, and here's where the linear position transducer was, the number was way off from whenever it was straight up and down. So I kept having to move the tendo over and to get it in a straight line. So I was spending a lot of time not coaching, and I was a tendo mover. Hated it. Annoyed me. Plus, I got 3 herniated discs in my back. 12 hours of bending over and standing up all day. I was having to lay down on the ground and have my legs up on the sofa and tell my wife, "No, sorry, I can't go with you and your friends tonight. I've got to lay here with Advil, ibuprofen, and pray to God that these spasms stop." So the Jim Moore had that x-axis correction, which is huge. With accelerometers, camera-based units, provided that they're reliable, you don't have to worry about that. But with a LPT, you do. And that's why I went with Jimmerware, because of that x-axis correction. I do it for now power training, and I break it down to the strength, speed, and speed strength. That's what I do mostly. If I am dealing with somebody that has got a specific fiber type adaptation that they want, I'll use velocity loss, and I'll stick with the papers by Pareja Blanco and where they looked at 20 and 40 and I think 30 and 50% velocity. I can't remember what the second one was. The 20 and 40 I included in a lot of my presentation, so I remember that very specifically.
So what you're saying is if you stop or you change when there's a velocity loss.
Yeah, just stop the set. And I usually do it about a 5 or a 10% velocity loss.
5 to 10% velocity loss
as
the stimulus or as the point of change, point of stopping.
Point of stopping, because all I want for those specific athletes, and they were mostly throwers, right, is all I want is type 2 fiber adaptations. I just want to hypertrophy those because those are your pure power fibers, and I don't want to accumulate all this fatigue that could cause the throw to suffer, their technical practice. Because what is our goal? It's not to have the shot putter with the biggest bench press, it's to have the shot putter with the furthest distance. So I look to minimize the fatigue in the weight room by having a smaller velocity loss. And we might have like a certain number of sets or reps that we're doing, and it was kind of arbitrary. But outside of that peak power stuff, where actually, so peak power, it's the strength, speed, and speed strength going on either side of the peak power point. The only other thing I use it for is velocity loss.
So just sorry to cut it. Yeah. So your velocity loss is a key metric that you will use within this
strength.
Within the strength, and if velocity is your component of development, are you still working off the same numbers and magnitude?
I have been, and the reason is because people say there's 2 schools of thought on velocity-based training. There's mine and there's Dan Baker's. Mine was developed because if I have the track team, there's 130 people on the floor at the same time. I am not going to remember 130 different velocities. I don't remember what we just ate for lunch, right? So I'm not going to remember 130 different individual velocities for where they hit peak power and what would change to their strength speed and their speed strength zones. So I just leave those zones the same. And I go with it. Is it the most precise thing in the world? No, but it works. So in the bottom line, I'm always going to take something that's effective over something that's completely precise. If it's whenever I think that one of the downsides that exists in sports science, and one of the things that people criticize me on a lot is that you're not precise enough. You're not precise enough. I'm like, yeah, but you can precision your way out of implementation. And Dan worked with few people at a time. I worked with 130 people at a time. And it was kind of a somewhat funny story. So they consider us the 2 titans, and Dan spoke at velocity-based training at the NSCA a few years ago in New Orleans. And he goes on his presentation and things like that, and he said, "Are there any questions?" I raised my hand because he talked about how he finds the individual specific velocities for each person. I raised my hand, and you actually hear a lot of people go, "Ooh." You go, "Hey, Dan, how are you going to do that with 60 people on the floor at the same time?" He's like, "Crikey, that's a bit of a booger there, isn't it?" Like, that's why I use zones. And that's what I said. And at that moment, we were on the same page. Because you look at, yes, Dan, where do guys hit peak power at? On squat, about 1 meter per second. Where is the intersection of strength, speed, and speed strength for peak power? 1 meter per second. So what we're just dealing with is management on the zone. So I lose some precision, but I'm okay with that because I can work with in the U.S. and different places are different. I completely understand that. So for my environment, that's why the zones were so handy. And plus, the velocity decreases year after year, right? So like a freshman will come in if they're not super highly trained, their 1RM velocity would be around 0.35 to 0.37 meters per second. Then they typically drop off about 0.04 a year because they've learned how to strain. They've become more efficient at the movement. So then by their senior year, they're moving at about 0.25 meters per second. So if I was still going off of that, I measure their load velocity profile and assume that it stays the same, like the Gonzalez-Badillo and Sanchez-Medina study says that it does. Well, maybe it does for 8 weeks. But actually, if you look at that study, it's always going down by 0.01 meters per second. Didn't actually truly stay the same. Is that a significant difference? No. But if we go another 12, 16, 20 weeks, then we're at a 0.03, 0.04. So then let's take that again and we put it on that massive scale. Then I've got to know what your velocity, what everybody's velocity was now, not just what it was as a freshman. So that was one more reason why I went with zones.
Okay.
It makes it for easier implementation. I've had concussions. I've got to keep things easy to implement.
Yeah. And I suppose that the continuous improvement that you've seen from using zones is validation of the program that you advocate.
Yeah, I would say that it was a validation of that, and I've got to publish that. It's sitting on my list of things to do. I've got a list of 40 papers that I need to publish. And
well, would that not be an important, because if it's continuous improvement, which we all strive for,
but it stops.
It stops.
It does stop
so
working.
Go into that now in a little more detail.
Yeah. So at about the year 3 versus that 12 to 18 month, that's whenever we didn't see a continuous increase. And the downside is, on one hand, it's like, oh, you're wrong. It's like, well, am I wrong or am I not? Because we stopped at strength speed. That's all we did with the guys. We went with straight weight and then we added chains on for accommodating resistance. What would have happened if we took the squats and started doing speed strength with them?
Yeah.
Would we have seen another bump? What would have happened if we went from clean to snatch? And we never could have done that because the head football coach liked cleans. He didn't like anything else. So, and then that gets to, another problem with the industry is sometimes that you're dictated what you can do by somebody who makes more than the governor of the state. So, the golden rule is not what I learned in church. It's he who has the gold makes the rules. And so whenever, boss man says, you're not doing that, you're not doing it unless you want to go find a different job. So we couldn't have changed to that. But I think that might have been something that would have elicited another adaptation. How steep would that line have been? I don't know. But I also think, and that this is where I missed the boat because I became with blinders, that everything had to be velocity, right? Is that special exercises and joint angle specificity. If you can go in and strengthen up that weak point, dude, you're going to see improvements.
Okay, now go back to that. So you have validation of, look, there's a period over which you're going to get, by applying the zone approach, improvements in strength speed strength. So you're working on both ends of the continuum here.
Yeah.
So you're going to get improvements. So your curve or your line is going to move to the right, let's say. Okay, you're going to get improvements. You're going to shift that forward. Then a stage comes where, through one reason or another, there's a tapering, leveling off, and you're not seeing improvement. You're saying, look, this could be due to philosophies as opposed to methodology. In other words, you're restricted in what method you can use. Yeah. As in, you change to the snatch from the clean or from heavy to light, or use special exercises. Okay, so but from the history of the science, we know that these are all methods that can be effectively applied depending on the individual, depending on the phase, depending on the time. Are you saying that, look, a lot of practices are not allowed implement individualized approaches simply because of the numbers game, because you've got so many? Yeah. So is that not a weakness in I suppose, the system structure?
Absolutely it is. Yeah, for certain sports, like, Division I football, 125 guys. There's not going to be a whole tremendous amount of individualization. But one of the things that I've been proposing and talking to people about is how many people do you have that are going to influence the outcome of a game? And those are the people that you look at, those special exercises to spend the time on. And while it, some people are like, and I know that in today's society, how is a way that I can say this and not just come off and have people like, ranting and raving against me, that whenever you get down to it, at the end of the day, a coach is hired and fired all based off of wins and losses. They're not going to be based off of how people feel about themselves. Okay. So, and I am big on using, sport, using sport to win kids rather than winning kids with sport. I'm huge on that aspect of it. But on the training and the individualization, I'm not. Because what I need is that it takes a long time to determine a special exercise. And sometimes it takes a long time to implement that special exercise. I'm not going to do that for 120 kids. I'm going to do it for those 2 or 3 that, we had a player at one time, my first year at Missouri, will remain nameless. But if with him we were 8-4 or 9-3. If he got hurt or his performance suffered, we were 4-8 or 3-9. So, whenever you have a person like that, well, those are the people that you implement that with. Unless you've got a huge staff and everybody's on the same page and everybody understands what these exercises are and what they do, then you can go out and you can branch out and do it with multiple people. But with the current rule system out, that you can only have 5 guys working with a team of 125, that poses a problem with individualization. Now, if it's 10, 15, 20 coaches, I think it could be done. But right now with the current setup, that's a huge weakness. I don't think that it's doable. Okay,
well, that is very interesting, because when you take a geographic or a cultural context, Gaelic teams, soccer teams, this side of the Atlantic, rugby teams, I would think teams that we know of and we would work with, we have a relationship with, is 1-6, 1-8 ratio of strength and conditioning too.
Oh, that's not bad. Yeah,
it's pretty. You'd like that.
Yeah.
That would get you a long way towards really pumping in the individualization.
Yeah, it would.
And monitoring.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a fair point. That your system restricts potential.
And you also have to think, and I don't know. I know that over here, that you have to have a certification to be a sport coach, or at least for certain sports, like with football, European football, which we call soccer in the U.S. In the States, they don't have to have anything to be a sport coach. So a lot of them don't understand the human body at all. They think certain things are sprinkled with pixie dust or certain things are sprinkled with poison. So it'll be, I don't want that exercise being done for my athletes, or I only want these exercises being done for my athletes. So then, you lead into those sorts of restrictions, that if the coach says, nope, I don't like that, then you can't do it, even if it's the best thing that would be great for this one individual, and he's the only one that would be doing it on the team. And that could take him from let's say a 4.3 40 to a 4.28 40 or a 4.25 40. You can't do it because the coach has got that restriction.
Okay, well, look, let's move on to just a couple of things before we finish. Challenges. Okay, there's one challenge that we've highlighted, a serious one.
Yeah.
So what are the other challenges that you see within the industry of the development of the athlete, regardless of the sport, from where we stand in our support staff? We're support staff conditioning the athlete.
I mean, those are a couple of the challenges there. Then challenges, at least for the collegiate environment, you've got the academic stress and having a hard time being able to control all those stressors. So that's an issue. Honestly, the stress now, something that I've noticed is that it's different than it was whenever you and I were in school. And it's far different from whenever I started coaching back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And a lot of it actually has to do with social media, right? I think if we look at, let's go back to Sapolsky, right? Robert Sapolsky, why zebras don't get ulcers. And whenever you get down to it, it's that whenever there's no stressor, the zebra goes back to eating and drinking, and he's not worried. He's not thinking about the lion. Well, now people have access to things that 24/7, and people have access to them that never would before, right? So we're at that pub eating lunch. Well, those guys get in there saying, "Oh, that player, he's a worthless piece of crap," right? The player would never hear it. Now those people have access to 24/7 to go after that player and say, "Hey, you're a piece of crap." So I think that that's a stressor, right? That didn't exist before. You know, I've got a slide whenever I talk about the effects of academic stress on illness and injury, and it's got a picture of one dude punching another in the chin, and it said, "This is the way arguments were settled before social media." And now it's, you know, all these, I put in this, in the United States, we got this guy who's got this segment called Mean Tweets, Celebrity Mean Tweets. And it's people that are sitting there reading the Twitter responses about him. And some of them, you can see these celebrities just physically, you know, folding up and crumbling as a result of that. And I think that this is a stressor that I don't know how to address. And I think that there's got to be psychological interventions that are like, "Hey guys, this is how you deal with it. Hey, maybe everybody needs to take Twitter and Facebook and Instagram off their phone," which is not going to happen.
Okay, so you highlight social media as a huge challenge.
It's also a huge, you know, benefit too.
The potential within it.
Yeah, because without social media, I wouldn't know about Setanta College and Liam Hennessy. Yeah. I wouldn't have been, you know, and without social media, like, how long did I go through my career with never hearing the name Dan Baker? Yeah. And Dan and I have done very similar things, and I think that we help each other out a lot. So there's some definite positives. So I don't want to come across, as I know that I just did, that social media is evil and it's the enemy. Well, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, good. So on the one hand, from the negative point of view, the social media is the information and the way you can provide stress. I mean, it doesn't have to be a kid or a teenager who's up late at night and the blue light and loss of sleep. And we know the relationship between reduced sleep and quality and not only academic performance, but physical injury. And then there's the stress side that comes along from the actual social engagement and the continuation, as you say, look, there was one way of sorting an argument out before, now this argument is strung out. But then on the other side, you have this powerful other element that's helpful, and it makes careers, and it's used to communicate as well. So those challenges are boxed probably neatly within the social media domain.
Yeah.
And you mentioned previously that you've had the organization of practice with numbers and ratio of strength and conditioning to player or athlete number. Mm-hmm. So the future then, so that's where we are. So the future, where do you see, okay, technology is a huge element. Technology, you use technology every day to help your athletes and help you know more about them. So what are your favorite instruments currently now from technology to help you deliver the best job you can actually deliver?
Yeah, so
you mentioned GymAware.
That's definitely one of my favorites. And like we were talking in the car, I had that epiphany a few months ago that I'm an idiot, and that I could have been doing force velocity profiling this entire time, this entire last 5 years that I've been using GymAware, and I never did because I'm just used to it being a velocity device. But it also gives force and power. So then you normalize those, you can get your curves, and you can look at all that. I use timing gates, and if you square time and you divide distance by that squared time, that's acceleration, right? So then we can use that to multiply times the body mass, which would be the force. So then you can look at force, and then you can multiply that by the velocity, just the distance divided by time, to get power, right? So then we can see how weight, body mass influences that, to see if somebody actually getting better or worse, even though that their time stayed the same. I use
ForceDeck. You're using the bigger.
I'm using I'm using the Pascal plates with ForceDeck software.
Okay.
And that has been just a lifesaver, because I remember that I was trying to use MATLAB, self-taught MATLAB person, and it was taking me. Let's see, I had 4 jumps each, for 35 guys. So that's 140 jumps.
Oh.
And trying to move the lines to get to the right spot. I spent 9 hours doing it. And, you know, my oldest daughter is a little kid. And I'm like, I'm missing her childhood because I'm looking at freaking moving numbers where these lines. So I called up Daniel Cohen and ended up getting 4 stacks. And just to me, it was worth the investment to, one, not have that stress. And I am, if you haven't noticed, I'm a fiery individual. So, you know, it saves me losing desks from kicking it whenever I get angry. And being able to spend more time with my family, you know, that's well worth the investment. Now I just need to get better plates so I don't have to, because what I end up doing is I've got, whenever they're not using the Monarch bike for wind gate testing, I take a 1 kilo plate and I've got to test each cell each time to make sure that they're still right on. Because they, you know, of course, load cells are going to drift, but sometimes they, you know, will just cut out. And because the card, the data acquisition card, goes bad from all the landing, right? Because these plates weren't meant for that. They were meant for high school education. And they're remarkably accurate, but they, you get what you pay for.
I'll pick up on what you said. You're still using a Wingate test.
I'm not doing the Wingate test because if there's 40 athletes in one bike, that's not time, you know, it's not. But that's, I would say Joe Signorelli's got one over in his lab. Okay. And if I see that it's not being used, I'll go pull that 1 kilo plate off of there because I know that's calibrated so that, you know, I'm not worried. Is it the plate's off or is the force plate off or is my weight off? Because I've had 20 kilo plates that weigh 17 kilos. I've even had 20 kilo plates that weigh 15 kilos, right? That when they're not calibrated. So I wanted to get that calibrated plate and test each individual.
Now you're mentioning an interesting point, the calibration of the sensitive instrument and the issues that can arise when you don't take care to calibrate regularly. Or at least assess, is 10 kilos still 10 kilos? So there's a lot of issues with technology that we probably ignore, as in standardization, calibration, reliability, validity, validation. So we discussed earlier about different force velocity instruments, you know, and different outputs. What would your advice be? Let's say somebody can't afford a gym aware or whatever. What would you suggest if somebody wants to get into the area of using, you know, velocity-based training and using some instrument? How would you? And the budget isn't quite, you know, the low budget, but they're very keen and they see the relevance of it. What would your guidelines be for that particular individual?
I typically still recommend LPTs because there's some cheap LPTs that are out there now, and they're pretty accurate and pretty reliable because it's a stopwatch and a tape measure, so you don't have to have an algorithm. Right? It's kind of like the old Albacop device for kind of movement jump. I mean, dude, it's still good because it still tells you what the displacement center of mass is. So they measure at 60 hertz. Sometimes they'll miss. Sometimes they'll break, but they're simple devices. So I usually, you know, still steer people over to the LPTs. The camera-based systems, if you have a known to calibrate off of, you're fine. Like with some of them, you know, you've got to calibrate to a distance. Well, a 45-pound plate's about, I think it's 18 and a half inches. I don't know what that is in centimeters, unfortunately. And I guess I should have said 20 kilo plate rather than 45 pound. But you know what that distance is, so you can use that to know what the displacement of the barbell was in relation to the plate. So then you could see how far did they go. So you've got the displacement, you've got a timestamp based off of how many frames there were. So then that theoretically would be pretty accurate. If they don't calibrate by distance, it's crap. You know, it's absolute crap. Because, you know, it's like be just eyeballing a baseball pitch. It's like, well, I know if it's slow or fast, but I don't know if it was 92 or 94 or 97. And the difference between 92 and 97 is a lot of money.
What would be your favorite, or would you have any preference for apps that you might have on your hand phone?
You know, I think there's that is it called My Lift app? The GB Marin, Carlos Balsabore, and everything, that those are going to be accurate because they measure, you have to input the distance. And then for that person, it always will roll back to it. And then it uses the frame rate as the timestamp, I assume. I'm just guessing, because unless they're using magic pixie dust, that's distance and time, and they'll get it that way. And they've produced some validated papers on those. And that's for the person with an extremely low budget. I don't use those personally. And I don't use them personally because I don't have time. Because if I've got to go in and I've got to point when does the toe start to leave the ground and when does the first contact made to get the true flight time. I'm not forwarding and going backward, having 40 athletes that I would have to do that for on multiple repetitions. I'm not doing it.
Okay,
but it is a very valid way.
As a start, the my jump.
My jump. I think it's great. I know a lot of people who use that. Like I said, I don't. I've got my Pasco plates, right?
Okay.
And so I'm just going to use that. I'm going to use my Pasco plates and 4 stacks. And I'm going to use my Pasco plates until I get better ones. And,
Good. Good.
So
you'd encourage, listen, start with whatever you can get your hands on.
Yeah.
But it's only a general. You may not be getting specific and precise, but you really like the 4 stacks, the Pasco plates. You like your Gym Aware. And look, the LP linear position transducers are very usable once you know their limitations as well.
Right.
Good.
And I've used some load cells. And now that I heard that Muscle Lab came out with a wireless one.
Yeah.
So now I want to go get that and throw it in on my sled poles. I don't know how much it costs. So that's always a limitation. And then I got to figure out how much force my guys are actually going to be putting out so I get the right load cell so I don't have too much, what is it called? Because there's going to be variability that exists within the load cell, and I think it's like 3%.
Yeah.
So if you use use a 500 kilo load cell when you only need 50 kilo load cell, well, that drift can be the entire way of the load cell. So of what you actually need. So then you don't know what the result was. Okay,
the education of the coach now that you will. I mean, we are here in Setanta College. It's our business education because we see a changing environment, which is it's social, not just social media. It's instrumentation, it's culture shifts, and again the softer skills. We're acutely aware. I think we mentioned earlier we were speaking. We can talk of the hard science.
Yeah.
But your major is psychology, is that it?
Yeah, education, school, and counseling psychology.
Okay, so surely that has been a hugely important background for you because it is a relationship at the end of the day.
100%.
So what would you advise those up and coming who are interested in the area, who are technology driven, who are hard science driven? What would you advise them to, how about that side? That side is something obviously very high in your ranking in terms of a skill set.
Yeah, the thing that I'm trying to push all the coaches towards right now, and I don't know if it's just because it's something that's interesting me or if it's really what they should be doing, is looking at self-determination theory from DC and Ryan. And that's a way to take the extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation. Because I don't want the athlete only working hard whenever I am looking at them and watching them and yelling at them and encouraging them, or have them doing things only when I'm watching because of fear. We all know that intrinsic motivation, while it's harder to do, it works longer and it works better. And so self-determination theory is a way to try and change that extrinsic to intrinsic motivation. And it's a 3-pronged approach. I want to talk about it briefly tomorrow in the master class, that there's autonomy, competence, and relatedness, right? So the competence is that they've got to be good at something. And one of the things that I bring up to people is try and relate it to a different example, is that you only do what you're good at, especially in public. And, for instance, I was in choir on and off for about 20 years. So, I love music, and at any point in time, I'll be out singing, anywhere, just doing it, much to the annoyance of my wife. I'll just pop into song like, you know, oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. Summer's gone and still the nights are calling. It's you must go and I abide. But you'll never see me play the guitar.
Well done.
Yeah, you'll never see me play the guitar or the trumpet or something or an instrument in public because I suck at it. I have a very low competence, so I don't want to do it.
Okay.
So we've got to pick movements and things that the athlete is competent in. Now, does that mean we never do new movements? Hell no. But it means that you teach that movement, but that's not the one that you're pushing right now. So, hey, let's just pick a random name. The hairy armpit exercise. That's the one that's going to do a great performance for you. We're going to go do it today. We're going to learn it. And then this is the thing we're going to push. Well, if they all look horrific whenever they're doing this new hairy armpit exercise, are they going to push it? No, because they're afraid of ridicule. They're afraid of, they know that they have a low competence. They're not going to get aggressive with it. They're not going to push it. So we need to make sure that the exercises that we're selecting to be our key big rock exercises are ones that they're competent in. There needs to be autonomy. Autonomy it can come in several different means. It could come from load selection. It could come from a variation of the exercise. Maybe, let's say it's cleans. Maybe they like doing the full squat clean. Maybe they like doing it from the hang. Maybe they like doing it from the floor. Maybe they like doing it catching in a split manner. Doesn't matter. Give them some autonomy. Give them that, throw them that bone so that they've got that because they'll work harder at it. And then there needs to be relatedness. And they need to know why they're doing it and how that's going to impact their results on the field. And whenever we can wrap those three things into our programming, that's when the magic happens.
Okay.
And I think that area is what we need to do rather than standing up, being the dude on the sidelines with, you know, some funny... I shouldn't say funny facial hair since I've got it, but, you know, sleeves ripped off, jumping up and down, making a big show production, you know, trying to, you know, be Ozzy Osbourne and bite the head off a bat and throw it. You know, let's not have that theatrics. Let's get to the point where they're having actual results because that shit's hard, man. You know, all those coaches burn out real quick because that takes a lot out of you.
Well, that's a nice wraparound from what we've discussed, which is about, well, your journey and the challenges that you face, be it with large groups in terms of very practical, you know, how do you get the individualization going? The technology that we've spoken about, the methodology, the systems, the progressions, and the challenges within that come as well. So that's a very good wraparound probably for us to finish up here.
Yeah.
The wraparound of that self-determination. If you can motivate from an external to an intrinsic and relate and develop and encourage that in your athletes, you probably get something that we're all looking for, which is longevity of the athlete.
Yeah.
Satisfaction. Okay, we can only win so much, but the ability to continue to strive, self-driven intrinsically rather than you driving it. I think that's a very nice wraparound on the whole area of classical strength and conditioning.
Yeah, sounds good.
I look forward to tomorrow's 4-hour workshop.
Sure.
Where all this
4 will probably take 5. But
it'll probably take 5. All the detail will be explored. But look, Brian, thank you very much. Go Ramila Mahagut. I love the Danny Boy kind of variation on the theme as well. You might do more of that later on.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Get a couple of pints and we'll see what happens.
All right. Thank you very much, Brian.